Good evening. Not legal advice. Hopefully, a very short video, but they're never short, so I apologize for that. Uh, People who care for chickens are really chicken tenders. Briefly, I'm going to talk about two things. One is Alpine GTI, two is MMTLP. So, first, I'm going to talk about Alpine. What's interesting about Alpine was another, I told you, outsiders can file briefs in the appeal. So there's a third party that was going to, that did, called New Civil Liberties Alliance. And I read that one that was filed, I think, today. And that one supports Alpine's position, Alpine GTII. So GTII is a company, Alpine was the broker shorting scumbags, in my opinion. Ongoing appeal. In the appeal, Alpine filed the first brief, and then there's a bunch of briefs that have been filed. That this one was in support of Alpine's position, but I wouldn't say it's in support of Alpine per se, because Alpine are still scumbags. Now, what is funny, well, funny in a way, is in the brief that was filed by Alpine, again, one thing they have to prove is they acted in good faith and they have clean hands and they're entitled to the court exercising equity. And they glossed over that. And the two briefs that have been filed by third parties that supported Alpine, they didn't go near that. And again, Alpine's history, 40 violations prior to April of 2022, really, my opinion, is scumbags. So they have to argue and prove somewhat good faith. I expect FINRA to hammer them, but I don't know how smart FINRA is. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But again, find it interesting in particular about the good faith argument and the fact that they have to pretend. And, if I was representing Alpine, what I would probably say is something along the lines of, even though my client's a scumbag, they deserve the protection of the law. But they're not even willing to do that. They're hiding behind the fact that they're being mishandled. And again, doesn't let FINRA off the hook, because FINRA should be going into federal court. I've said this like 50 times. But one thing that's interesting is that the challenge that's made by American Civil Liberty, what is it? New Civil Liberties Alliance. Basically, it says that FINRA is operating as just their own protected governmental entity, and it takes about 12 steps to get beyond FINRA. And FINRA does investigation, enforcement, prosecution, and penalty. They act as a judge and jury, but they're immune. So they have a position that should be protected by constitutional protections. And again, ultimately, the line says it should be construed as state action so that FINRA would have to comply with the Constitution, due process, etc. So, interesting argument, doesn't change the fact that Alpine's scumbags, and it'll be interesting ultimately how this appellate court rules to see how they deal with the good faith argument of these scumbags. And again, just a reminder, at any point in time, FINRA, as opposed to protecting their status as an administrative agency, could go into federal court, bring forth evidence of the 35,000 violations, and go after them for that in federal court with that evidence. So that's my suggestion. Obviously, people are at risk, and that should be done immediately. So that's Alpine. That was today's brief. There may be other parties that come in on one side or the other, but just the fact that there's briefs filed suggests that people realize the importance of the issue. And again, Alpine are still scumbags. They'll still go down. But this relates to FINRA's authority and hopefully will result in changes that help protect retail. What we'll have to see. So that's today's update as to Alpine, FINRA, GTII. Because ultimately, people believe that if Alpine goes down, that will help GTII. Not legal advice, not financial advice. MMTLP, just bringing up to speed, I gave you a scenario that we were now in the arbitration selection process, that there was a disclosure form that went out asking arbiters about whether they had a belief or knowledge about naked shorting and if they were open to being fair. So ultimately, uh, there were about half the people that responded. So the half I did not respond, I crossed off. That left a very small number of arbiters, and of that small number, I made my own selections. I don't think it left an adequate number of arbiters to select from. So I filed an objection. So I filed an objection in FINRA objecting to the arbitration process in that they didn't provide enough arbiters. They also, as it turned out, chose one arbiter that I crossed off and stricken. So maybe that was an accident, maybe that was a mistake. But ultimately, the question is, did they provide enough of a pool? And should they have put out, I asked for the naked shorting disclosure. Perhaps they should have put it out. Perhaps that would have resulted in a bigger pool. And anyway, they're probably not very happy with me. Filed the objection tonight. We will see what their response is. Currently, we do have 3 arbiters, and I think there is a hearing coming up in October. But we'll have to see, based upon my objection of tonight, whether we're going to re-poll for arbiters. That was ultimately my request. Again, process seems kind of haphazard, but I'm going to stay on top of them, and I'm going to make an issue of any errors and mistakes as we go along, and I'll keep you apprised. And also of anybody who wants to get a list, if at some point in time you want to get a list of those arbiters that didn't have the conscientiousness to respond to the disclosure, I can provide you that list too. And so be it. That's all I wanted to talk about. That's brief. I think we're like 7 minutes. That's really brief for me. Anyway, hope everybody's well. Have a good night. If I see any additional updates, Alpine-GTII, MMTLP, Finger, whatever else, you'll get it. Take care. Have a great night.